Wow, friends, times have truly changed. Do you know that when we started Chabad of Nashville over 25, 26 years ago, and it was Chanukah time, and we wanted to put up a public menorah, we were told by some of the local Reform rabbis and leaders of the Jewish Federation back then, please listen, do me a favor, don't put it out there. Don't attempt to do a public menorah lighting. We don't display our Jewishness publicly. We were told, listen, don't light menorahs in public spaces. We don't mix church and state. We were told, please keep your Judaism indoors. This is the South. This isn't a place to display your Jewishness publicly. Yet, as a Chabad rabbi, we displayed our Jewishness with a pride, with a sense of, I'm a Jew and I'm proud, and we went out and we lit public menorahs at the state capitol. We had a menorah lighting with the mayor of Nashville back in the early 2000s at the waterfront park. We did the menorah lighting with the Nashville Predators in 2008 and for many years after that, and all around Nashville. Yes, friends, did you ever hear that expression, you can't beat him, join him? Friends, fast forward now, over 25 years later, and now rabbis from all the Jewish denominations in Nashville are lighting public menorahs. The federations are involved in public Hanukkah displays, and all the opposition, literally, has melted. The truth became apparent to all. Christians respect Jews that respect themselves. And for us to be proud of who we are is the only way we can carry on the torch and ensure Jewish continuity well into the future. Friends, Jewish law tells us a very unique aspect about the Hanukkah menorah lighting. Hanukkah begins this week. We all got to light the menorah. Where do we light the menorah? Do you know that Hanukkah is one of the mitzvot that we are told in Jewish law to have Persumei Nisa, to publicize and promote and advertise the miracle of Hanukkah. And therefore, we light the menorah for the world to see in a manner that illuminates not just the internal private home like the Shabbat candles, but the external public domain. You see, most Jews, when they light the menorah, do you know where they place it? They place it on the windowsill facing the street. Some light the menorah right outside the right side of the front door closest to the street, outside by the yard, so everyone can see it. In the Chabad tradition, we place the menorah on one of the inner doors, actually on the left side, which is opposite the mezuzah, to publicize the mitzvah amongst all the members of your household, so everyone will see it carefully and closely. Unlike YouTube ads, where you can just press skip and skip an ad, the Hanukkah menorah is one ad that a Jew can't skip. The Rebbe actually called for us to place menorahs in public domains, place them in parks, place them in streets, in public squares, everywhere, with great fanfare, to bring the light to everyone in this world. Now, the truth is the world is a very big and noisy place. One may say, how will my small little candle that I light in the window or in the door of my home make a difference in this big, overwhelming world? I mean, does it really matter if I light my menorah on the windowsill or if I just put it on the table in the living room or the dining room like I light my Shabbos candles? Well, friends, we look into the Torah. The Torah reading of this week, Parsha Perspective, tells us the story of Joseph being sold by his brothers, put in prison, and it ends off with an interesting story. It says Joseph is thrown into prison, and some of his cellmates were actually some of the criminals from the Egypt where he was. And the Torah tells, the Torah doesn't write any letter, any verse extra. The Torah is very precise. And the Torah tells us in 23 verses, it's a lot. It describes a dialogue between Joseph and two of his cellmates. They were actually two ministers from Pharaoh. One was Pharaoh's butler, bartender, and one was Pharaoh's baker, the royal pastry chef. It tells us in the Torah in very detail how Joseph sees these two ministers, but with sad faces. And he says, guys, what's bothering you? Why are you so down? And they both have the same answer. They both said, we had very disturbing dreams last night. And Joseph, instead of returning to his holy books, he says, tell me about your dreams. And the Torah describes at great length every detail of the two dreams of the butler and of the baker. And it also tells us Joseph's unique solution, an interpretation that he gave to each of them. And we know the baker never made it out of prison alive. And he tells the butler, you're going to go out of prison. You're going to go back to serve Pharaoh. Now, the continuation of the story is really essential because in the next week's Torah portion, King Pharaoh, he also had some very disturbing dreams, and none of his advisors, none of his astrologers, nobody can interpret the dream satisfyingly to Pharaoh. So the butler who was in prison with Joseph, he says, "Hey, King Pharaoh, there's a Hebrew lad in prison, and he's known to be a big expert interpreting dreams. He interpreted my dream correctly, and that's why I'm here now." And we know that Joseph comes out of prison and he interprets the dreams to Pharaoh just the way Pharaoh found it to be satisfying, and they came true, and Joseph is promoted to be the viceroy, second in command of Egypt. Now, the Torah tells us every detail of this whole story, dreams, the interpretation, 23 verses. I mean, think about it. The 6 days of creation, there were only 31 verses. It's a pretty important thing. Only 31 verses, 8 more verses of the story of Joseph and the dreams. Or take a look at the Ten Commandments. Ten Commandments only has 14 verses, 9 verses less than the story of the dreams of Joseph. Why are the dreams so important to know every detail? Now, you know, Joseph was a holy man. He didn't waste his time. Why did he even spend his time with these cellmates who were criminals, who weren't the most spiritual men? Now, imagine the people who were in prison were not the most God-fearing people, and they could have influenced Joseph negatively. And Joseph could have gone back to study his books, his Torah, his Chassidus, his Talmud, etc. Yet, what does Joseph do? He goes and he interprets the dreams of this butler and baker. Why? Why didn't he just keep to himself? Friends, everything the Torah writes is there's a lesson. And it's a very relevant lesson in our daily lives about why it's important to know the fine details of the dream and the lesson for us to take to heart. You see, friends, the Torah really could have said, Joseph heard about these dreams and he solved them, and the lad remembered him. He could have written it in 2 verses. But the Torah writes it in 23 to teach us a lesson. You see, 50 years ago, on Chanukah 1973, the Rebbe of blessed memory, he revealed the most revolutionary idea. It's really so simple, but yet so profound. And this is an idea that actually illuminates the Rebbe's revolution in transforming the whole world from night to light. How to change the world. Practically speaking, one may say, how could a finite human being, you and I, change the entirety of existence? On the eve of Hanukkah, the Torah relates the 23-verse episode of Joseph and the baker and the butler's dreams are here to teach us how one person can bring light and holiness to this entire world. Because to change the world, you must do one rather achievable thing. Take responsibility for your immediate environment. That's it. Be it in your office, in your home, or on an airplane, or even in a prison cell. Do one thing. Take responsibility for your immediate environment. Show empathy to the person that's closest to you. Light one candle in your vicinity. Generate a single point of warmth around you. Say one kind word, give one genuine smile, and the entire world could be transformed. The world may seem big and distant, but the universe is simply a chain of small universes, micro-galaxies, tiny planets, personal worlds that affect one another. Thus, one good deed could ignite a chain reaction of light that will illuminate all of existence. How does this Joseph HaTzadik, how does he change his own life from prisoner to viceroy? And how does he change the entire world? One tiny act. He merely raised his eyes to see 2 cellmates, and he saw their depressed dispositions, and he said 4 words. Why are your faces sad? These words set off a chain reaction that changed his destiny from end to end and led to saving the entire world from 7 years of famine, the way he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams. So what is the turning point in Joseph's shocking life story? What was the turning point, the tipping point, the critical moment that turned a series of enslavement and imprisonment into becoming the market leader of the most powerful nation? Why the sad faces? Joseph cared about his fellow man, even his fellow who was a criminal in the prisons of Egypt. The Torah shares the dialogue between Joseph and his ministers, the butler and the baker, in detail in 23 verses to teach us that instead of curling up in a ball and bemoaning his life and complaining, why am I in prison? Why did my brothers sell me, etc., and etc., and he might have been right. Joseph lit a single candle and thus brought light and brightened the entire world, literally warming, fueling, and saving the entire world. They tell a story of Jerome Moto, who was a psychologist for the San Francisco Police Department. And part of his position, he would investigate the homes of people who fell into despair, people that were sad, and they committed the tragic act of taking their own lives. And he would look for notes and hints after a person took their own life. He would go to their home, and he would try to find what's the mystery of this desperate act of self-destruction. Why did people do that? And it was all with the hope that maybe they can learn something and maybe prevent such future tragedies from happening. In the 1970s, this man Moto, who worked for the San Francisco Police Department, he went along with a medical researcher to the home of a man who actually jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. It was a young man who lived alone in his bare apartment. And on that day, they went to his home, and on the table, they found a note from the man that jumped. He says like this, I'm on the way to the bridge. If on the way one person smiles at me, I won't jump. From the outcome, we can sadly presume that no one smiled at this desperate soul. And Dr. Moto couldn't rest from this note and began to develop a method to support people who lost their passion for life. And he proved that maintaining a simple, constant correspondence and interest preserves hope in them and strengthens their will to live. How could a person living in our modern world, a world devoid of not a single thing, a world advanced beyond all imagination, walk his last walk, literally dying, for a single smile from a fellow human being? Not one smile. Say we were to focus on the optimistic prescription inferred from this story, that if every human being genuinely smiled at one another, how much pain and suffering could be prevented? Let me take it one step further. If this is the world-changing and life-saving power of a single act of empathy, imagine the power vested in the act of a mitzvah. The story I'm about to share foregoes the need to imagine what would happen if we just smiled, the difference it can make in someone's life. In the summer of 2001, there were two young roving rabbis of Chabad that went to Mumbai, India. Rabbis in training traveled to Mumbai. One day, to strengthen the small cities in India, where there were a few Jews, they took a long train ride to a city called Calcutta. And the president of the community was happy that somebody remembered about them. Chabad sent two young rabbis in training to go be with them. And he shares with them an amazing story. He says 9 years ago, all right, here in Calcutta, there were very few Jews. He says, I really had no contact with them. And one night, I was sitting very sad. I came here and I was sitting in a hotel, very lonely. I felt like I'm an only Jew in the world. Nobody's connecting with me. I'm all alone. And it was Chanukah night. And I said, why should I light the Chanukah candles? I mean, it doesn't mean anything to anyone. But then, you know what? I said, let me light it. I was very sad. He said, I was by myself. No one was around. I lit the candle and I put the TV on. I flipped through channels and suddenly I came across an image of the Rebbe of Chabad. And he was lighting the menorah. There was a menorah right behind him and he was standing in front of the menorah. When was this? This was in 1992, Chanukah live. There was a broadcast of the menorah lightings, of the first menorah lighting, first candle on the menorah, from the Western Wall in Jerusalem live, from the Red Square in Moscow, from the Eiffel Tower, from Melbourne, Japan, Hong Kong, from all over the world, people were lighting menorahs. It was broadcast live. But the center menorah lighting was in 770 Eastern Parkway, New York. And the Rebbe was there. I was actually there too. I was a young student. And the Rebbe stood there in front of a screen and he watched the kindling of the menorahs all over the world. This was in 1992 Chanukah. And this man says, I was in Calcutta and I was watching in my hotel room all by myself. I was watching this lighting. He said, after everyone lit the menorah, the Rebbe spoke, and the Rebbe said like this. Can you imagine? He's watching this in Calcutta, and he says that the Rebbe said a Jew can think that he does a mitzvah in one place, it doesn't make a difference to anyone. The Rebbe says your mitzvah affects the whole world. And he says that's why part of what we learned, God made satellites. It was an innovation that was fairly new. And then with the satellite, one Jew can watch another Jew in another place of the world, other side of the world, light the menorah. As we see here now, the Rebbe says, we're lighting the menorah here in New York, and we're talking to Jews in Israel, in Moscow, in Paris, Japan, and in Calcutta, India, and Australia. The man says to these roving rabbis, I thought I was imagining that the rabbis mentioning Calcutta. I didn't understand. There was no menorah lighting at Calcutta. Why did the rabbi mention about a menorah lighting Calcutta? And who is this Rebbe that's addressing this world in this conversation in TV here? And all of a sudden it hit me like a blazing light. The Rebbe is talking to me. The Rebbe was sharing that the little light that I lit in my hotel room in Calcutta eliminates as far as New York and Jerusalem and to all the capitals and all the homes all over the world. Friends, we light the 8 candles of Chanukah on the 8 days to commemorate the one cruse of oil that was naturally enough for one day, but it burned for 8 days. And in the laws of Chanukah, in the code of Jewish law, they ask a question. Why did we light the menorah for 8 days? If there was only enough for one day and it burned for 8 days, so then the miracle really was only for 7 days because there was enough oil to burn for the first day. So why do we celebrate Hanukkah 8 days with 8 candles? Why don't we have a 7-day miracle? Because the miracle was only for 7 more days. And the Code of Jewish Law brings several answers, including some of them is that the first day actually was celebrating Hanukkah victory, the victory of the Maccabees over the Greeks. And the other 7 days, we commemorate the miracle of the burning of the oil. Another answer, it says that the first day we celebrate the very finding of that little cruse of oil. The one that the Greeks couldn't defile. They thought they defiled it all. We found one. That was a miracle. And the following 7 days, we celebrate the miraculous oil burning supernaturally for 7 days more, etc. But on top of these many explanations, I once heard a resounding and resonating answer. And that is that on the first day, we're celebrating the fact that the Hashmonaim, the Maccabees, used whatever they had to make the world around them shine. I mean, everything was broken. They went into the temple, holy temple. It was defiled by the Greeks. Everything was shattered. And they could have given up. They could have said, listen, what's the use of lighting the fire tonight when the oil is going to just run out tomorrow, and then there just won't be any more oil for the next 7 days? They could have had despair. They could have given up. They didn't do this. Instead, they jumped at the mitzvah and illuminated the world around them with whatever God had given them at that moment. Then, God took the next step, and the oil lasted for 8 days. So the miracle of day 1 is no less a miracle than the miracle of 8 days of light. Because our job is not supernatural. Our job is not to make the cruse of oil burn for 8 days. Our job is to unearth and take the one cruse of pure oil that God has embedded into our essence and make it burn for 1 day. Make it light our world, our environment, our sphere, our menorah. And if we do our part, surely God will do the rest. I want to conclude with a most moving story from my colleague, Rabbi Moshe Brisky, the legendary shliach in Agora Hills in the Los Angeles County. Rabbi Brisky, many know he's a talented orator. His Torah classes are attended by Jews from all walks of life. At a class on faith, Rabbi Brisky was sharing how God runs the world even in times of difficulty. And he noticed, as he's talking, one of the participants had tears in his eyes. Now, it was surprising to see that the words that the rabbi shared touched him, because the man was not a very traditional observant Jew. I mean, he did not really practice much of the traditions, the customs, the religions. Like, why was he so moved? After the class, the man approached the rabbi, and he shared that a few years ago, he went through a very, very terrible tragedy. His wife and his 3 daughters were involved in a car accident, and 2 of the daughters were killed on the spot. And he says, Rabbi, he sank into a deep depression. He just found it difficult to restore the joy of life. And this situation got so bad that his marriage itself was destroyed. He divorced his wife. He was left alone with his sole surviving daughter. And he was unable to bear the suffering. And he planned on taking his daughter to see a movie, saying goodbye with one last good positive experience, dropping her off at her mother's home, and he intended to do what he felt he had to do, God forbid, take his life and return his soul to his maker. He says, Rabbi, we came to the mall where the movie theater was located. And when we came there, we heard happy music in the distance. And my musical ear picked up that it sounded like Jewish music, and I was intrigued to find out what's going on. After all, this is a mall in Los Angeles. This is not a synagogue. And we got closer, and we saw a group of boys, yeshiva boys, dancing around a large menorah. He says, even before I can understand what's going on, a young man took my hand and pulled me into the circle. And then I looked at my daughter from afar, and I saw the smile spread across her face. It was the first real smile since that accident. And I knew I can't do this to her. And at that moment, I decided to continue living for her. She says, Rabbi, tonight when you spoke about how God runs the world, even in times of difficulty, I can attest to eternal truth. Now, a very strange thing happened. Tears began to well up in Rabbi Brisky's eyes. He says, Sir, what was the name of that mall? And the man says, Rabbi, the name of that mall was the Mount Gate Plaza Shopping Center in Simi Valley. Now it was the rabbi's turn to complete the story. He says, come and see how much God cares for you. He says, let me tell you what happened. A few days before Chanukah, I decided to intensify the Persumei Nisa by sharing the miracle of the lights, by placing a Chanukah menorah in a place where I never placed it before. So I picked up the phone, it was pre-Google, and I dialed 411, and I asked the operator for a number of a mall in Simi Valley. And the operator said, which mall are you looking for? And the truth is, I had no idea. I hope the operator would actually direct me to the busiest mall. The operator chose to give me the number of the Mount Gate Plaza Mall. It was the first night Chanukah. We arrived at the mall with some volunteers, with many hundreds of donuts. We had an amplifier with a microphone and equipment. We were ready for some major Hanukkah celebration, but you know what we found? A completely deserted place. The mall was closing. I mean, there was just nobody there. And besides the movie theater, all the stores were empty. It was a mall that was about to close down. And we were very disappointed. But since we saw people standing in line to enter the movie theater, we took the menorah from the entrance of the mall and we placed it near the entrance of the movie theater. And I remember turning home that evening with a heavy feeling of failure, thinking, you know what? I failed in my decision to intensify the miracle of Hanukkah, sharing the light, because there was no one at the mall. Friends, we all know the end of the story. How this man's life was saved that night. Because one smile saves a light. One candle lights a soul. One deed brings Mashiach. Friends, I ask you this Hanukkah, smile despite the darkness. Make the world a brighter place with another mitzvah. Do the one deed that will make this world a brighter and safer place for you and for me and for all of Israel. May we merit that the light of our menorahs around the world mingle together with the light of the menorah in the Holy Temple, lit by the Kohen Gadol, the High Priest, with the eternal and everlasting redemption now. I wish you, my friends, a most meaningful, uplifting, inspiring, illuminated Chanukah. Go ahead. Let there be light. Create that light. Light the menorah. Put it in the window. Share a smile, a good deed. My spark of light and your spark of light and your neighbor's spark of light. Millions of sparks of light will make this world a brighter and a better place, ready for the time of the coming of Mashiach. May it happen speedily in our days. Happy Chanukah.